4:30 in the morning, Trenton Medical Center. Dr. Elena Novak had been on her feet for 13 hours, with another 5 hours of her shift still ahead of her. The sound of the heart rate monitor blended in with the background noise of the hospital corridors, becoming almost imperceptible to her. She looked up from the medical records and rubbed her reddened eyes. She was 36, but she looked 45. 17 years of medical practice had left their mark. Wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, premature gray in her dark hair, pulled back into a careless bun. The emergency room at Trenton Medical Center was considered one of the busiest in New Jersey. 90,000 visits a year. Car accidents, overdoses, heart attacks, gunshot wounds, an endless parade of human tragedies passing through her hands. Elena coped, but the price was high. Elena's phone vibrated for the third time in the last hour. A message from Michael. "Not coming home again? We need to talk." She ignored it, just like the previous two. 8 years of marriage had crumbled like a house of cards. Once, their union had seemed perfect. Two doctors who understood the demands of each other's profession. But then Michael retrained as a healthcare administrator, got a job with regular hours, and Elena was left in the chaos of the emergency room. Gradually, they became strangers in their own home. "Dr. Novak, the patient has arrived. Severe allergic reaction." Nurse Patricia Gomez interrupted her thoughts. A woman in her 40s, large, with a slightly tired but always attentive gaze. They had worked together long enough to understand each other without words. "Status?" Elena asked, putting down the phone. 35 years old, female, anaphylactic shock, suspected reaction to peanuts, airway compromised, blood pressure dropping, epinephrine administered prior to arrival. Elena nodded and headed for the observation room. The sound of sirens grew louder as the ambulance approached the emergency room. The familiar sequence of actions. Thoughts of personal problems instantly faded into the background. The patient was brought in on a stretcher, pale to the point of blue, with her face and neck rapidly swelling. The woman was gasping for air, trying noisily to breathe through her constricted throat. Elena instantly assessed the situation. Prepare for intubation and a second dose of epinephrine, hydrocortisone intravenously. While the medical team followed her instructions, Elena quickly reviewed the documents. Rebecca Wilson, 35, resident of Princeton, history of peanut allergy. She had lunch at a restaurant, and 15 minutes later, the reaction began. The next 20 minutes turned into a fight for the patient's life. Rebecca's airways were almost completely closed, requiring emergency intubation. Her blood pressure dropped dangerously low. Her skin broke out in a rash. Elena worked methodically and quickly, not allowing herself to be distracted by emotions, which she could only afford to feel after the patient had been stabilized. "Dr. Novak, the patient's husband has arrived," said Ray Jackson, the administrator on duty, peeking into the room when Rebecca's condition finally stabilized. "Tell him I'll be out in 5 minutes." Elena finished writing up the prescriptions and gave the nurse her final instructions. Fatigue washed over her with renewed force, but she knew that talking to patients' relatives required special composure. In the waiting area, Elena immediately noticed the patient's husband. He was a tall, well-built man with dark hair and a worried look on his face. His expensive suit looked rumpled, his tie was loose. He nervously twirled his car keys in his hands. "Mr. Wilson?" Elena approached him. "I'm Dr. Novak. Your wife had a severe allergic reaction, but we were able to stabilize her condition." James Wilson looked up at her, his eyes full of anxiety. "Will she survive?" "Yes, we've managed to stabilize her," Elena replied. "But she'll have to stay in the hospital for at least a day under observation. The reaction was very serious. Has she had such severe attacks before?" "No." James shook his head. "There have been mild reactions, but nothing like this. I don't know how this could have happened. She's always so careful with her food." Elena noticed that the man's hands were shaking slightly. She had seen many relatives of patients and had learned to distinguish between different shades of emotion. genuine anxiety, feigned concern, relief hidden behind a mask of sadness. In James Wilson's eyes, she saw real fear. Sometimes even minimal contact with an allergen is enough, she explained. Perhaps the restaurant used oil or other products containing traces of peanuts. While Elena was explaining the situation, Dr. Edward Klein, the head of the department, approached them. An elderly doctor with an impeccable reputation, he was known for his pedantry and demanding attitude toward staff. "Dr. Novak," he nodded to her. "Mr. Wilson, I've reviewed your wife's medical history. Dr. Novak has taken all the necessary measures, but we would like to continue monitoring her." Elena noticed how James Wilson tensed up when Klein appeared. Interesting, she thought. Is this a normal reaction to an authoritative figure, or something else? "When can I see her?" James asked. "In an hour or an hour and a half," Klein replied. "She's being transferred to the intensive care unit right now. Dr. Novak will monitor her until the end of his shift, and then Dr. Rivera will take over." Elena filled out the remaining paperwork and gave James the necessary information. Passing by the staff lounge, she overheard a snippet of conversation. "The Wilsons are back. I wonder what it is this time." The voice belonged to Mark Jenkins, one of the orderlies. Elena slowed her pace. "Don't you think it's strange that she comes to us every few months with different symptoms?" Jenkins continued, addressing someone in the room. Elena decided to return to this conversation later. Right now, she was too exhausted to deal with hospital gossip. In the intensive care unit, Rebecca Wilson lay connected to monitors. The intubation tube was still in place, but the swelling had begun to subside. Elena checked her vitals and made notes in her chart. Their eyes met for a moment. Rebecca was conscious, her eyes expressing fear and gratitude at the same time. Elena nodded reassuringly to her. Finishing her examination, she headed for the exit and bumped into James Wilson in the hallway. "Dr. Novak," he stopped her. "Thank you. I know you saved her life." "I was just doing my job," Elena replied with a standard phrase, but something in his gaze made her add, "But I'm glad I could help." James handed her a business card. If anything changes, or if you need to contact me directly." Elena took the card. "James Wilson, Financial Advisor, Princeton Wealth Advisors." She put it in her coat pocket and nodded. "Of course, Mr. Wilson, but everything is stable now. You can visit your wife. She is conscious, although she cannot speak because of the intubation." As she was leaving for home after her shift, Elena remembered the strange conversation the orderlies had had about the Wilsons. She opened Rebecca's electronic medical record and scrolled through the entries. Indeed, Rebecca Wilson had been to their hospital several times over the past year. Unexplained abdominal pain, sudden fainting spells, heart rhythm disturbances. Each time, diagnostic tests revealed no serious pathologies. Elena closed the file and thought. James Wilson's business card was in her coat pocket. Something about this family seemed wrong, but maybe it was just the paranoia of a tired mind. She decided she would return to these thoughts after she had slept. 3 weeks had passed since Rebecca Wilson's emergency hospitalization. Elena Novak sat in the hospital cafeteria, reviewing the test results of her unusual patient. She didn't usually pay so much attention to patients after they were discharged, but she couldn't get this case out of her head. Partly because of the strange history of hospital visits, partly because of James Wilson, who had called her twice to express his gratitude and ask for her opinion on his wife's condition. After the second call, they agreed to meet for coffee, solely to discuss Rebecca's health, Elena reminded herself. But when James showed up at a cafe near the hospital, her heart betrayed her and began to race. He was attractive in his sincere concern, a vulnerability rarely seen in successful men. "To be honest, I don't know who else to turn to," James said, twirling his coffee cup in his hands. "We've seen so many specialists. No one can explain why her condition keeps changing." Elena studied Rebecca's medical records more closely after that meeting. Over the past 2 years, There had been mysterious episodes of tachycardia, temporary loss of vision, unexplained abdominal pain, dizziness, and fainting spells. Each time, diagnostic tests showed only minor abnormalities that did not explain the severity of the symptoms. Some doctors cautiously suggested psychosomatic disorders, but no one wanted to make such a diagnosis without ruling out physiological causes. The first meeting in a cafe was followed by a second, this time in a restaurant, and a third, a walk in Cadwallader Park. Elena convinced herself that it was all professional interest, a desire to help a patient whose case turned out to be more complicated than it seemed at first. But when James lightly touched her hand during one of their meetings, she did not pull away. And when he called in the evening just to hear her voice, she talked to him for over an hour. That evening, when she returned home, Elena found a note from Michael. "I'm staying with my brother. I need to think about a lot of things." She felt not bitterness or regret, but a strange relief. Their marriage had long since turned into the coexistence of two strangers. The last thing that bound them together was habit and an unwillingness to admit defeat. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. James's number on the screen evoked mixed feelings, anxiety and excitement at the same time. "Rebecca is in the hospital again." His voice sounded tense. "She fainted and is experiencing severe chest pains. She was taken to Princeton Medical Center." "I can come," Elena offered, without thinking about the professional ethics of the suggestion. "Please." An hour later, Elena entered Princeton Medical Center, not as a doctor, but as a friend of the patient's family. It was a breach of professional boundaries that she diligently ignored. James was waiting for her in the lobby, his face gaunt with fatigue and anxiety. "Thank you for coming," he said, hugging her tightly, holding her a moment longer than simple friendship would require. Elena reviewed Rebecca's test results with the permission of her attending physician, a colleague she had once worked with. Cardiology tests, scans, blood tests. Everything was normal. Another episode with no clear diagnosis. "I don't understand," James whispered as they stood by the window in the hospital corridor. "I saw her pain. It can't just be in her head." "There are many conditions that are difficult to diagnose," Elena replied in a professional tone, but inside she was growing doubtful. Too many episodes, too many different symptoms, too little objective evidence. In the weeks that followed, her relationship with James deepened. Their meetings in cafes turned into long conversations in his car, parked in secluded spots. Their touches became more intimate, their glances more candid. Elena knew she was crossing a line, but she couldn't stop. One evening, James invited her to his home. Rebecca was at a health resort, another attempt to improve her health. "I never thought I'd live like this," he admitted as he poured wine into glasses. They sat in the elegant living room of a spacious house in the suburbs of Princeton. Constant fear, hospitals, endless bills. "Do you know how much we've spent on tests over the last year?" Elena shook her head. "Over 120,000. Insurance doesn't cover everything. Experimental treatments, consultations with the best specialists." He paused. "And nothing helps." Elena listened, feeling a strange sympathy for both of them. For Rebecca, suffering from an incomprehensible illness, and for James, tormented by her condition. Perhaps too much sympathy, clouding her professional judgment. That night, they crossed the final line for the first time. Elena stayed until morning, feeling a dizzying mixture of passion, guilt, and strange liberation. By that time, Michael had officially moved out of their shared home, taking most of his belongings with him and leaving a cold message on the answering machine saying that it would be better for both of us. A few days later, Rebecca returned from the sanatorium, and Elena tried not to think about how James had greeted his wife, what he had said to her, whether he had slept in their shared bed. Her professional life was also going through a rough patch. Dr. Klein had commented on her lack of concentration, and Nurse Gomez had caught a mistake in her medication prescriptions. a rare slip-up for the usually attentive Elena. "You need a vacation," Patricia said with a mixture of concern and suspicion in her eyes. "You haven't been yourself lately." Elena dismissed her colleague's concern, but she knew that her work was suffering because of her emotional and physical exhaustion. The nights with James, the days spent anxiously waiting for his calls, the attempts to maintain a professional facade at work, it was all taking its toll. One evening, James called her in tears. "She's in the hospital again," his voice trembled. "This time at yours, in Trenton." A strange reaction to the new medication. Elena was off duty, but she immediately drove to the hospital. Rebecca was under observation in a general ward, her condition stable but requiring monitoring. Elena looked at her chart when none of her colleagues were looking. Another unexplained episode, another medication prescribed for the symptoms of the previous unexplained episode. James was waiting in the hallway, his eyes lighting up when he saw Elena. "What did the doctors say?" she asked. "The same as always. They'll monitor her, run additional tests. Maybe it's a side effect of the new medication." He ran his hand through his hair. "I can't live like this anymore, Elena. It's destroying both of us." Looking at James's exhausted face, Elena made a decision, a small ethical compromise that seemed justified at the time. "I'll talk to her doctor," she said. "I'll check what tests haven't been done yet, what specialists could help. I can get access to information that's usually unavailable." James looked at her with such gratitude that any doubts melted away. At that moment, Elena saw nothing wrong with her actions, just using her professional knowledge and connections to help a woman in pain. The next day, she approached Dr. Rivero, who was handling Rebecca's case. "I know the patient," she said, trying to sound professional and detached. "I observed her during an anaphylactic reaction a month ago. It's a complicated case." Rivero nodded. "Very complicated, and, to be honest, increasingly suspicious." "Suspicious?" Elena tried to keep her voice neutral. "Between you and me, I'm starting to think it's Munchausen syndrome or something like that. Too many unexplained symptoms, too few objective findings." Elena felt a strange sense of relief. So she wasn't the only one who saw inconsistencies in Rebecca's medical history. But Rivero's next question caught her off guard. "You know her husband, right? I saw you together in the hospital cafeteria." "He consulted me about his wife's condition," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Rivero nodded, but his expression was unreadable. That evening, Elena made her first changes to Rebecca's treatment plan. Nothing radical. She simply suggested additional tests to Rivero, a new medication that might help with the symptoms. He agreed, trusting her experience. When she told James, he hugged her tightly. "I don't know what I would do without you." Elena understood that her intervention was the first step on a slippery slope. But at that moment, it seemed to her that the end justified the means. She wanted to help Rebecca. She wanted to ease James's burden. She wanted to be useful. That evening, as she was leaving the hospital, she ran into Patricia Gomez. The nurse looked at her with an unreadable expression. "I didn't think you were working today." "Just stopped by to check something," Elena replied, deliberately avoiding any mention of Rebecca. Patricia nodded, but her gaze remained intense. "Be careful, Elena. Within these walls, everything has consequences." Elena didn't ask what Patricia meant, perhaps because she already knew the answer. Autumn in New Jersey had painted the foliage in shades of red and gold. Elena and James were walking through Mercer County Park, holding hands like teenagers. 3 months of secret meetings had turned into a full-blown romance, the intensity of which surprised Elena herself. In 12 years of working in emergency medicine, she had seen how quickly life could change, but she never thought it would happen to her own life. "I filed for divorce," James said, looking at the horizon. "This morning." Elena stopped, her heart skipping a beat. "Are you sure now is the right time?" she asked. "Rebecca just got out of the hospital after her last attack." James ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Elena had learned to recognize as a sign of stress. "I can't take it anymore, Elena. It's destroying me. Every day there's a new illness, a new symptom, a new hospital. I've tried to support her all these years, but it's only getting worse." There was a sincerity in his words that touched Elena's heart. And yet, the professional part of her mind couldn't ignore the strange inconsistencies in Rebecca's medical history. Symptoms that appeared and disappeared for no apparent reason. Diagnoses that varied from doctor to doctor. Over the past month, Rebecca had been hospitalized 3 times. First with stroke-like symptoms, all tests were negative. Then with severe abdominal pain, diagnosis not confirmed. And finally with temporary blindness in her left eye, which resolved without treatment. "You know what the neurologist at the University of Pennsylvania said?" James continued. "That it could be an atypical manifestation of a psychological disorder. 7 years and tens of thousands of dollars to hear that it's all in her head." Elena chose her words carefully. Some psychosomatic conditions can cause very real physical symptoms. "Do you think she's making it up too?" James's voice became sharp. "I didn't say that." Elena took his hand. "I just want you to be sure about your decision to divorce. It's a big step." They continued their walk, but the mood had changed. Elena felt that James was hiding something. At home, she looked through the copies of Rebecca's medical records that James had given her for consultation. Reviewing these documents in this context was a clear violation of professional ethics, but Elena convinced herself that she was acting out of good intentions. Rebecca's medical history became more and more confusing the deeper Elena delved into the documents. The first serious health problems began shortly after her marriage to James 7 years ago. Before that, there had been nothing remarkable except for a peanut allergy. After that, there was a cascade of mysterious symptoms that never manifested themselves in the presence of medical personnel, only in the words of Rebecca herself or her husband. Elena dialed the number of her friend Diana, a psychiatrist from Philadelphia, without mentioning names or circumstances. Theoretically, if a patient had Munchausen syndrome, how would it manifest itself? She asked, after exchanging pleasantries. Diana paused. That's an interesting question for an emergency room doctor. But okay, the classic signs are an extensive but contradictory medical history, symptoms that only appear when no one is watching, willingness to undergo painful procedures, moving between hospitals and doctors, no improvement despite treatment, often has a good knowledge of medical terminology. Every point matched Rebecca Wilson's picture. What about Munchausen syndrome by proxy? That's when a guardian fabricates an illness in a dependent person, usually a child. It's a rarer and more dangerous form. Diana paused. Have you observed anything like that in the patient? Just theoretical interest, Elena replied, feeling an unpleasant chill. Thanks for the consultation. The next day at the hospital, Elena noticed that her reputation was changing. Colleagues who had previously been eager to seek her advice now kept their distance. Senior nurse Patricia Gomez intercepted her in the hallway. Dr. Klein asked about your frequent consultations on the Wilson case, she said quietly. Be careful, Elena. Hospital walls have ears. That evening, James invited Elena to his home. Rebecca was at another consultation with a specialist in New York, accompanied by her sister. I can't live in this house anymore, James said, showing Elena around the impeccably decorated but cold interior. Every corner reminds me of illness. Look. He opened the closet in the master bedroom, dozens of boxes of medicine neatly arranged on the shelves. In the bathroom, there were special handrails installed for someone with mobility issues. In the living room, there was a whole table covered with medical journals and notes. This is no longer a home, it's a hospital branch, James said bitterly. Do you know how much time I spend dealing with insurance companies, paying medical bills, looking for new specialists? Elena listened sympathetically, understanding his exhaustion. She herself had seen how chronic illnesses destroy not only patients, but also their loved ones. Later, over a glass of wine, James became more candid. I tried to be a good husband. I really did. But I can't live like this anymore. He paused. You know what's ironic? She has huge life insurance, $1.5 million. I insisted on it at the beginning of our marriage, when she was healthier and the premiums were reasonable. I thought it would keep her safe if something happened to me. Elena froze with her glass halfway to her lips. And now I pay for that insurance every month, along with huge medical bills. And I still feel like the worst person in the world because sometimes... He faltered. Sometimes? Elena asked quietly. Sometimes I think her death would have been a relief. For both of us. James covered his face with his hands. God, I'm a terrible person. Elena put down her glass and hugged him. You're not terrible. You're just tired. What you're feeling is normal under this kind of stress. He clung to her, and soon the comforting embrace turned into passionate kisses. In the guest bedroom, far from Rebecca's personal belongings, they made love with the desperation of people seeking oblivion. Then, lying in the dark, James whispered, I want to start a new life. With you. Words that should have filled Elena with joy caused her strange anxiety. She remembered the life insurance policy, the divorce, Rebecca's strange illness, Munchausen syndrome. The following week turned into a kaleidoscope of professional mistakes and personal paranoia. Elena double-checked her prescriptions twice, afraid of making a mistake. Once she forgot important test results for a patient. Another time, she misinterpreted an ECG, which was noticed by an intern. Dr. Klein called her in for a talk. Your work has always been impeccable, Dr. Novak, he said, sitting at his desk. But lately, I've noticed some disturbing trends. Perhaps you should take some time off. That's not necessary, Elena objected. Just personal problems. Divorce proceedings. Klein looked at her intently. Just divorce proceedings? Or are there other circumstances affecting your work? Under his piercing gaze, Elena felt transparent. I don't understand what you're talking about, she said, trying to sound confident. I'm talking about your special interest in Rebecca Wilson's case, your friendship with her husband. Klein folded his hands on the table. This is a small hospital, Dr. Novak. Not much goes unnoticed here. Elena felt the color rush to her cheeks. We're just friends. I advise him about his wife's condition. Then why are you looking at her medical records when she's not your patient? Why are you calling other hospitals to inquire about her medical history? The questions hung in the air. Elena couldn't find an adequate answer. I'm concerned about possible Munchausen syndrome, she finally said. I wanted to be sure before raising the issue officially. Klein looked at her for a long time. In that case, document your suspicions according to protocol and refer the case to the appropriate committee. In the meantime, I advise you to keep your distance. Elena left the office feeling like her world was falling apart. As she stood in the hallway trying to collect her thoughts, her phone vibrated. A message from James. Rebecca is conscious but in poor condition. Dr. Rivero says she needs to be hospitalized. An hour later, Rebecca Wilson was taken back to Trenton Medical Center. Ironically, the schedule assigned Elena as her attending physician in the emergency room. Upon entering the room, Elena felt a strange dissonance. The woman on the hospital bed was both her patient and her lover's wife. Rebecca looked exhausted. Her skin had an unhealthy grayish tint, and there were deep shadows under her eyes. Dr. Novak, Rebecca smiled weakly. We meet again. There was no suspicion or accusation in her voice, only the fatigue of someone accustomed to the hospital routine. Elena maintained a professional tone as she checked her vital signs and asked the standard questions. The symptoms were vague again: severe dizziness, numbness in the limbs, blurred vision. All preliminary tests showed no abnormalities. The neurological examination was within normal limits. And yet Rebecca was clearly suffering. Her pain seemed real. We'll do some additional tests, Elena said, trying not to make eye contact with James, who was standing by his wife's bed. An MRI, an extended blood panel, possibly a lumbar puncture. James nodded with an expression of gratitude that now seemed fake to Elena. Or was she becoming paranoid? Leaving the room, Elena ran into Patricia Gomez, who had also been assigned to care for Rebecca. "What a coincidence," the nurse remarked, looking through her assignments. "You're handling Mrs. Wilson's case again." "That's what the dispatcher decided," Elena replied. "I can transfer the case to another doctor if you think it's necessary." Patricia looked at her appraisingly. "No, but I want you to know that I will be monitoring all appointments and procedures very closely, and document everything." The warning was clear. Elena nodded. That's how it should be. In the evening, as Elena was finishing filling out the paperwork, James found her in the empty doctor's office. "Thank you," he said, closing the door carefully, "for taking care of her, despite us." Elena put down her pen. "James, we need to talk. About your wife. About her illness." "I know what you're thinking," he interrupted her. "You're not the first doctor to suspect psychological causes, but you don't live with her. You don't see her suffering every day." "It's not just that." Elena lowered her voice. "Your talk of divorce, of life insurance, it creates a certain impression, you understand." James's face contorted. "Do you think God, Elena. I was just sharing my feelings with you, my pain. I love you, I want to be with you, but I would never hurt Rebecca." His sincere indignation made Elena doubt her suspicions. Maybe she was being unfair to him? Maybe her own guilt was making her see the worst in the situation? "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm just confused. It's all too complicated." James hugged her, and for a moment Elena allowed herself to melt into his embrace, to forget her doubts and fears. But when he left, she opened Rebecca's medical records and began to carefully study all the prescribed medications, all the past episodes, all the lab results. Something was eluding her understanding, some detail she couldn't grasp, the truth hidden behind the symptoms and diagnoses. What if Rebecca's illness was real, but of a different nature than the doctors assumed? What if it wasn't a psychological disorder, but something more sinister? When Elena finally looked up from the medical records, it was late at night outside. She made a decision to check every aspect of Rebecca's history, find all her medical records, talk to all the doctors who had treated her. If necessary, she would even break more professional rules. But before she could close the file, there was a knock on the door of the doctor's office. Dr. Klein, despite the late hour, looked fresh and composed. "I have questions about Mrs. Wilson's case," he said. "And this time, I demand complete honesty, Dr. Novak." The intensive care unit was plunged into semi-darkness. It was 3:30 in the morning. The dim light from the monitors cast bluish reflections on Rebecca Wilson's pale face. The IV drip counted down the seconds. Elena Novak stood by the bed, clutching a syringe filled with clear liquid. A security guard dozed by the door. The nurse had gone on break. Fragments of conversations raced through Elena's mind. Dr. Klein's gaze, Patricia Gomez's warning, James's confession about the insurance, the strange coincidences in Rebecca's medical history. That conversation with Klein had ended unexpectedly. Instead of accusing her of inappropriate behavior, he had shared his suspicions. "We have reason to believe that Mrs. Wilson's condition may be the result of external influences," he had said. "Do you suspect poisoning?" Elena asked. "We found traces of anticoagulants in her blood that were not prescribed by doctors. And this is not the first case of unexplained presence of drugs." Elena hardly slept after that. Klein asked her to keep the information confidential while the investigation was ongoing. Now, looking at the sleeping woman, Elena tried to piece together the puzzle. If James poisoned his wife for the insurance money, or did Rebecca take the drugs for her symptoms herself? The syringe in Elena's hand contained morphine, a standard painkiller for patients with the kind of pain Rebecca was experiencing. One dose, medical care, 3 doses, fatal. She had already noted the appointment for this hour in the chart, an entry that would not arouse suspicion if she administered a triple dose now when no one was looking. "I'm so tired of this pain," Rebecca had told her the day before. "Sometimes I think death would be a relief." James had said the same thing. Coincidence? Elena made her decision. She emptied the syringe into the IV, then the second, then the third, a lethal dose for an emaciated body. James was waiting for her in the doctor's office, having broken the visiting rules. "How is she?" he asked. "I gave her a painkiller. She should sleep until morning." James squeezed her hand. "Thank you for everything you do for her, for us." The alarm sounded 47 minutes later, an emergency code in Rebecca's room. Elena rushed there with the resuscitation team. The monitors showed a critical drop in blood pressure, arrhythmia, and respiratory arrest. "Start resuscitation," she commanded, knowing it was useless. The next 30 minutes turned into a chaotic attempt at rescue. The morphine had already spread, suppressing her breathing and slowing her heart. At 4:52 a.m., Elena pronounced Rebecca Wilson dead. "Cause of death?" asked the administrator on duty. "Preliminary, cardiac arrest due to chronic condition. The exact cause will be determined by autopsy." Autopsy. A word that sent a shiver down her spine. But with such a complicated history, it was standard procedure. James took the news with what seemed like genuine shock. He sat in the waiting room, his head in his hands. His shoulders shook with sobs. "I'm very sorry," Elena said, keeping her distance. In the morning, the hospital was buzzing. The death of a young patient had attracted a lot of attention. Elena noticed Dr. Klein consulting with the hospital's lawyer. Patricia Gomez was studying the medication records with unusual thoroughness. "Dr. Novak," Klein stopped her. "Come to my office, please." An unfamiliar woman with short hair and attentive eyes was waiting in the office. "This is Detective Sarah Connors from the Trenton Police Department. She has some questions about Mrs. Wilson's death." "Is the police required in cases of natural death?" Elena asked. "Not usually," Connors replied. "But there are inconsistencies here that need to be clarified." "What are they?" "A preliminary toxicology test showed high levels of morphine, significantly above the therapeutic dose." Elena was prepared for this. Perhaps there was a pharmacological error or incorrect calibration of the equipment. "I also noticed your unusual interest in this patient even when she was not under your care. It's a complex case that interests me professionally. And another interesting fact, you and Mr. Wilson kept in touch outside the hospital. There are witnesses." Elena felt the blood rush to her face. "Mr. Wilson consulted with me about his wife's condition. That's not against the rules." "Of course, but it creates a context that cannot be ignored in the investigation." "An investigation into what?" "A death under suspicious circumstances. That's all for now. Please don't leave town and keep all your records." After the detective left, Klein stared at Elena for a long time. "You know you weren't the only one who administered morphine. Nurse Rodriguez is also listed in the log." Elena nodded. Marisol Rodriguez administered a standard dose of morphine 2 hours before the fatal injection. "I followed the orders," she said. Klein sighed. "Elena, I've known you for many years. You were the best doctor. Whatever happened, I hope the truth will come out." At home, Elena found a message from James. "We need to talk, alone, today." They met at a motel outside of town. James looked exhausted, his eyes red. "Did you do it? Did you kill her?" Elena froze. "Why are you asking?" "The police came to see me. They asked about us, about the insurance. They think it was murder, that we did it together." "What do you think?" "I don't know who to believe. I loved you, Elena, but now I don't know who you are." Loved. Past tense. Elena felt something break inside her. "We have to stay calm, act normal." Normal? My wife is dead. The police think I'm involved. Rebecca had been sick for years. Her death wasn't unexpected. Stick to that story. Don't talk about us without a lawyer. You didn't answer my question. Did you do it? Instead of answering, she asked, "What about you? Did you poison your wife?" Klein said anticoagulants had been found in her blood that no one had prescribed. His face changed. Shock, disbelief, anger. You think? God, I loved her. So that's what you think of me. I don't know what to think. All I know is that we need to be careful. The next few days were tense. Elena returned to work, although she was removed from direct patient care. She did administrative work, feeling the stares of her colleagues. James organized the funeral, which was attended by many people. Elena watched from a distance. She noticed Detective Connors there, calmly observing what was happening. A week later, Klein reported the autopsy results. The cause of death was acute cardiopulmonary failure due to an opioid overdose. The morphine level was 5 times higher than the therapeutic dose. Could this be the result of drug accumulation? She was receiving morphine regularly. Possibly, but the police have a different version. They have new information. What is it? Traces of drugs were found in James's apartment, including anticoagulants from Rebecca's blood. And a diary. A diary? Rebecca's. She wrote that she was afraid her husband was trying to kill her. She mentioned a strange taste in her food, symptoms after eating meals prepared by James. But that's not. The detective wants to talk to you again. They found out that James was on the verge of bankruptcy. The insurance was his only chance. Elena's world was falling apart. Was everything she believed to be true a lie? Was every word James said, every confession, just manipulation? Detective Connors waited. Dr. Novak, we have new information. I'd like to hear your version again, from the beginning. Elena looked at her, realizing she had to make a decision. Tell the truth? Which part of the truth? Or continue to deny everything? Rain was starting outside the window. Elena took a deep breath. The rain drummed on the windows of the interrogation room. Elena sat across from Detective Connors, who was methodically laying out folders with documents on the table. Let's be frank, Dr. Novak, Connors began. We have recordings from the hospital's surveillance cameras. You and Mr. Wilson met repeatedly in the doctor's lounge, in the corridors, in the cafeteria. There is witness testimony about your meetings outside the hospital. She placed photographs on the table. Elena and James in a cafe, in a park, entering his house together. You had an affair with your patient's husband, she stated, not asked. Elena looked at the photos, realizing the futility of denial. Yes, but that doesn't mean Not about that, Connors interrupted her. Next, toxicology tests confirmed the presence of morphine in an amount 5 times the prescribed dose. According to the log, on the night of Rebecca Wilson's death, morphine was administered by 2 people, Nurse Rodriguez at 1:15 a.m. and you at 3:30 a.m. She opened another folder. Experts say that such a concentration could not have been the result of drug accumulation or a dosing error. It was an intentional overdose. Elena felt the room begin to spin. I'd like to speak to a lawyer. That's your right. Connors nodded. But before we finish, I want you to know that we checked all the surveillance camera recordings. At 3:30 a.m., you entered Rebecca Wilson's room and stayed there for 6 minutes. 47 minutes later, a code blue was called. Death occurred at 4:52 a.m. Connors paused. Now about Mr. Wilson. A financial analysis showed that his company was on the verge of bankruptcy. He owed the banks more than $800,000. His only major asset was his wife's life insurance policy worth $1.5 million. You think We found anticoagulants in his home medicine cabinet, the same ones found in Rebecca's blood, and her diary, where she describes her suspicions that her husband is trying to poison her. Elena couldn't believe her ears. But then why would he, with me? An excellent cover, isn't it? Connors raised an eyebrow. An affair with a doctor who has access to the patient. If something goes wrong, you can always shift the blame. At that moment, Elena realized that she had become a pawn in someone else's game. All of James's declarations of love, all the talk about the future, were they just a tool of manipulation? But something didn't add up in this picture. If James planned all this, then why did I administer the lethal dose? Connors leaned forward. You tell me, Dr. Novak. The room was filled with a heavy silence. Outside the window, the rain intensified. I want to talk to a lawyer, Elena repeated, and I want to know what James Wilson said. He claims he had no idea about your actions, Connors replied. He says you convinced him that Rebecca's death was only a matter of time because of her condition. That you suggested helping nature along. Each word hit like a hammer. James was putting all the blame on her. But hadn't she made the decision herself that night? 3 days later, Elena Novak was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The investigation into James Wilson continued, but no direct evidence was found linking him to the morphine overdose. The press pounced on the story with relish. Fatal prescription, read the headline in the Trenton Times. Deadly romance, doctor killed patient for her husband. Television channels broadcast footage of Elena being led out of the hospital in handcuffs, while her colleagues gave interviews expressing shock and disbelief. During the lengthy investigation, new details came to light. Rebecca's diary turned out to be genuine. She really did suspect her husband of trying to poison her. Tests carried out on samples of her hair showed the presence of anticoagulants over the last 6 months, long before Elena appeared in their lives. This discovery changed the course of the case. Now James Wilson was also charged, not with direct murder, but with the systematic poisoning of his wife, which led to her weakened condition and numerous hospitalizations. At the preliminary hearing, Elena Novak pleaded guilty to manslaughter, not premeditated murder. She claimed that she acted out of compassion for the patient's suffering, unaware of James's role in her illness. I violated the Hippocratic Oath and will live with that for the rest of my life, she told the court. But I never planned to kill Rebecca Wilson for the sake of a relationship with her husband. I sincerely believed that I was relieving her of suffering that, as I now know, was caused by the actions of her own husband. The court sentenced Elena Novak to 10 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 7 years. Her medical license was revoked for life. James Wilson received a harsher sentence, 25 years without parole. He was found guilty of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and incitement to commit a crime. Detective Connors visited Elena in prison a month after the sentencing. You know, he almost got away with it, she said. If you hadn't administered that morphine, he could have continued to slowly poison her for months, maybe years. No one would have connected her eventual death to his actions. Is that supposed to comfort me? Elena asked bitterly. No, but it's the truth. Sometimes the worst decisions lead to unexpected consequences. In prison, Elena began writing her memoirs, not for publication or fame, but as a way to make sense of her own actions, of how a professional who had sworn to do no harm could cross the line. I am not looking for excuses for my actions, she wrote. I made a choice that night, and I must take responsibility for it. But I also became part of someone else's story, the story of James and Rebecca Wilson, which was much darker than I could have imagined. Elena Novak's case became a textbook example in medical ethics courses. Young doctors were taught to recognize the signs of emotional burnout that can lead to fatal mistakes. Hospitals tightened their protocols for controlling opioid drugs. Rebecca Wilson's family created a foundation to study Munchausen syndrome by proxy and other forms of medical abuse. The foundation's brochure featured a photo of a smiling Rebecca, a woman who, until her final days, did not know that her husband was slowly poisoning her and whose doctor decided to end her suffering in the most radical way possible.